I've been a truck driver for years, and this gave me a feeling of control, of understanding the road, the places. I know most of the routes I take, and honestly, I never thought anything could happen to me. But that changed on one of the most routine deliveries of my life. It was a trip along I-40, between Arkansas and Oklahoma, nothing I hadn't done 1,000 times before. The weather was calm, the sky was cloudy, and the road, as always, was a tangle of marks and signs that I had already memorized. I am meticulous with my logbook. I always make a point of recording everything. Departure time, mileage, routes, it's the basics. I'm not one to forget, or at least I didn't used to be. When I arrived at the destination, the first thing that caught my attention was that the address didn't look familiar. Not at all. I revisited the place in my mind, but couldn't associate it with any other part of my work. The strangest thing was that my logbook didn't match. The schedule and route notes I had made just didn't make sense. What was there didn't match what I remembered. I had written that I was following I-40, but I didn't recognize the name of the street I was on, and even stranger, the mileage was wrong. There was a detour there that I didn't remember taking, and most disturbingly, the arrival and departure times were out of place, as if there were gaps in the hours I spent driving. My stomach turned just looking at that, and a feeling of slight panic began to rise, but I tried to convince myself that it was all just some mistake. Of course, I was tired. This had to be some kind of memory failure, right? But then it was when I looked into the cab of the truck that a chill ran through my body. The hands were dirty. No, they weren't mine. I knew it was other hands. The marks were spread across the steering wheel and seats. They were big hands, as if someone had grabbed them desperately while I was driving. I looked at my own hands. They were clean. I was sure I hadn't touched anything dirty there, much less left finger marks like that. It was as if someone else had been there, but I was alone. I swear I was. This, coupled with the fact that I couldn't remember how I had traveled that road, left me with a very strange feeling, almost as if I had been part of something that wasn't me. I checked the truck's clock, and the time also seemed distorted. I was just there to deliver the cargo, but there was something wrong with every detail. Something that didn't fit. That place, that destination, caused me increasing discomfort. It wasn't just the route or the logbook, it was the environment. Something in the atmosphere was heavy, the smell of mold and dust was present in every corner. The truck's cabin seemed to be tighter than usual, as if the air was denser. I realized that, throughout the trip, I hadn't seen any signposts, any indication of where I was. Even the view around me was distorted, as if I were in an unrecognizable landscape, but at the same time it seemed familiar, like something I had already seen, but in a blurred way. The feeling of being in a nightmare came over me. I was awake, but everything felt out of place. Like something was playing with me, making me go in circles, but I didn't know where the next turn would come from. The feeling of discomfort only increased, but what terrified me most was the fact that I was completely alone, or at least I thought I was. I decided to get out of the truck to try to clear my mind, stretch my legs, maybe take a look around. The problem was that, when I left, the place seemed even stranger. I didn't see anyone anywhere, but I felt a presence, as if something was watching me. I tried to look at the buildings in the distance, all empty, and then I noticed that the streets were completely deserted, as if the world had stopped there, in that exact place. I couldn't understand. I used to pass through small towns, but nothing like this. And that feeling of being watched. I couldn't ignore it. I went to the back of the truck and realized that the cargo was still there, intact. This wasn't strange in and of itself, but the way the air felt thick around me made me question if what I was feeling was real. The sky was still cloudy, as if a storm was about to arrive, but there was no wind. Nothing moved, not even the grass around it. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. Then, as if it were an instinctive reaction, I looked in the truck's rearview mirror. What I saw made me freeze completely. The image was distorted, but I was sure of what I saw, a shadow, with the outline of a person, standing in my direction. But there was no one there when I looked ahead. Panic started to take over me. My heart was beating so fast I could hear the sound of it in my ears. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but when I got back into the truck and looked at the rear-view mirror, the shadow was still there, clearer, but, as if it were now closer, as if it had moved towards me. I didn't know what to think anymore. The feeling of being trapped somewhere out of the ordinary, in a space where time and reality no longer made sense, was eating me up inside. I tried to start the truck, but I couldn't. The engine wouldn't start. Everything was out of control, and for a moment, the fear I felt turned into pure hopelessness. Then, as if fate were mocking me, the truck's radio crackled. I didn't touch it, there was no reason for that to be happening. The sound was uneven, as if someone was trying to speak through static, and the scary thing was that through the interference I could hear one word. Just one, come back. I didn't know what that meant, but the feeling that something was approaching became even stronger. I looked out the truck window, but the road was still empty, which made me doubt my sanity. I couldn't understand what was happening, how a simple delivery turned into this unexplained nightmare. The sound of the radio, that "come back," kept echoing in my head, and I knew that I could no longer move forward. Something told me that it was better for me to leave, but I didn't know where. I was still paralyzed, not knowing what to do. The radio continued to emanate static, and that word, "come back," echoed in my mind like a warning. Desperation was taking over, but something compelled me to continue. What was happening to my mind? I had to get out of there, but how? How could I know where to go if the road in front of me looked so distorted, like it went nowhere? I decided to try one more time to start the truck. Something inside me wanted this to happen, perhaps out of pure need to escape that place. I turned the key, and the engine finally roared. My body shook with relief, but at the same time, a feeling of cold ran through me. I didn't know if I should be grateful that the truck started or if this was part of some game I didn't understand. Either way, I didn't want to stay there any longer. I accelerated and followed the road, but as I went, it seemed like the path never ended. The landscape repeated itself, the horizon didn't change, and the fear of being trapped in some kind of limbo consumed me. It was then that, out of nowhere, the road disappeared. There was no more asphalt, no tire tracks, nothing. I was in the middle of an empty field. That place, which once seemed familiar, was now desolate and gloomy. I looked back and, to my surprise, the truck was no longer there. The vehicle simply disappeared, as if I had never been in it. There were no signs of my passing, no tire tracks or any trace of where I was. What remained was the echo of that word, "come back," which now seemed to come from all directions, as if the place was calling me. I woke up in the truck seat. It was as if nothing had happened, but everything was wrong. The logbook was intact, but the timetables and routes were still distorted. The marks on my hands. I never knew what happened, but one thing is certain, that place, that road, something was there, something I can't explain. To this day, I have never been able to find the address of that place, not even the road I took. And the strangest thing is, none of the people I know, not even other truck drivers, know about anything like this. That nightmare still haunts me, and to this day, when I get on the road, I have the feeling that something is waiting for me. I was taking a night trip along a deserted road, one of those long, lonely routes that seem endless. I-10, if I'm not mistaken, between Arizona and California, is nothing but a straight line of asphalt that seems to suck away any sense of time or space. I was already tired, the road was empty, and the silence was only interrupted by the sound of the engine. The sky was clear, but the darkness was deep, and I knew that if anything was going to happen, it would happen then. But nothing prepared me for what I saw. There he was, an elderly man with a worn hat and a coat that looked more dirty than old, standing on the side of the road. He waved, asking for a ride. I don't know why I stopped, maybe it was the loneliness of the road, maybe a feeling of obligation. I don't usually stop to hitchhike, especially on such an isolated road, but something about this man caught my attention. He seemed so fragile, so alone, as if he were an echo of everything that place represented, an endless desert. So, without thinking much, I stopped. The old man entered with a slow movement, as if his body was reluctant to move. He didn't say much, just thanked her with a toothless smile. But as he settled into the seat next to me, something strange happened. I looked out the window to see their reflection in the pane, as I always do, and realized that he wasn't reflecting. There was no image of him in the window, just the emptiness of the road behind us. I kept looking, trying to understand if it was some kind of play of light, but the feeling that invaded me was instantaneous. The old man looked at me, fixedly, with those eyes. And I swear, something was wrong. It was a look that didn't blink, didn't move. I felt like he was watching me in an intense way, as if he knew something about me that I didn't know myself. There was no reflection, but his eyes were there, looking straight at me. I tried not to think about it too much. Fatigue was getting to me, and the road was starting to make me lose focus, but the man's gaze wouldn't leave me. He seemed closer than he actually was, and I felt a growing pressure in my chest. The silence inside the truck became thick, as if time had stopped, and all I could hear was the beat of my own heart. He didn't move, he didn't speak. Just those eyes, fixed, watching me, as if I were prey and he was waiting for the right moment to attack. With each passing kilometer, the discomfort inside the truck only increased. I tried to look at the road, focus on what was ahead, but I couldn't. The old man didn't speak, and the silence between us seemed even heavier. It was as if the truck had become a closed place, a prison with just the two of us inside. I looked in the rearview mirror, trying to see the road behind us, but the man wasn't reflecting in the window at all. The reflection of me, the steering wheel, the seats, everything was there. But his? Nothing. No shadow, no contour. The space where he should have been reflected seemed empty, a hole, a distortion in the glass. This made me even more uneasy. I looked at him, trying to hide my discomfort, but he was still staring at me, those eyes fixed. They weren't just ordinary eyes, I noticed something there, something that I couldn't define, but that made me freeze inside. He didn't seem human in a way. It wasn't his appearance, but something about that stillness, that stillness. He was so calm, as if he were made of stone, and his eyes didn't blink, didn't move. They were there, as if watching me with a purpose I couldn't understand. I was no longer seeing a man, but a presence, a thing that was waiting for the right moment to act. I decided to speed up, trying to get away from that strange feeling, the growing pressure in my chest. I looked at the dashboard, at the speedometer, and saw that I was going too fast. But what scared me most was that when I looked back at the road, the landscape was becoming distorted. The trees beside the track, which had previously seemed normal, began to lengthen, stretch, as if time was contorting around us. The sky, which had previously been black, now seemed more closed, more oppressive, as if an invisible weight was imposing itself on everything. But the old man, he didn't react. He was still there, motionless, and his eyes were fixed on me, as if nothing around him mattered. I tried to convince myself that I was going crazy, that tiredness was taking over me, that I was seeing things that weren't there. But then, his voice came. It wasn't loud, nor serious, but so soft, so peaceful, that it made my hair stand on end. "You won't be able to get away," he said. His voice seemed to infiltrate the cabin, as if it were coming from every corner. There was no emotion there, just a realization, something inevitable. I looked at him, trying to understand what was happening, but I couldn't. He was no longer just in front of me, he was no longer just inside the truck. He was in my head. And then, I realized that the road had no end. It was as if we had entered a cycle, a loop, where nothing changed. I was trapped. I was starting to lose control. The road in front of me, which had once seemed simple and familiar, now seemed endless. The tire tracks on the asphalt were crumbling, as if the road itself was fading away as I passed. The old man, there next to me, remained motionless, his eyes fixed on mine, and I felt a growing pressure on my mind, as if he was messing with my thoughts, getting into my head, controlling my every movement. I tried to scream, to try to do something, but the feeling of being powerless, of being completely at his mercy, swallowed me up. I looked around, trying to see any sign of a city, an exit, anything that would take me out of this madness, but there was nothing. What once looked like a wide, well-maintained road was now deteriorated, with potholes and cracks in the asphalt, as if we had traveled for decades in just a few minutes. That place was disintegrating around us, and I didn't know if I was dreaming or if I was really there. Every time he looked at the old man, he seemed more distant, more strange, as if his presence was dissolving, but his eyes were still there, unchanging, inescapable. His voice, soft and cold, infiltrated the cabin again, now clearer. "You'll never get out of here," he said. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was all a delusion. But then something in the rearview mirror made me stop. I saw, or rather I sensed, that the road behind me was also falling apart. The truck's lights went out for a moment, and when they came back on, everything was covered in a thick fog. I was in a place that had no exit, no end. I looked at the old man again, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a smile of gratitude or kindness, but a smile that made my blood run cold. He knew I was trapped. I started to accelerate, faster and faster, but the truck was no longer responding. The acceleration made no sense, the engine roared, but the speed did not increase. I was trying to escape, but the truck was stopped, as if it was being sucked into it by an invisible force. The old man didn't move, but his look now was triumphant. He knew I no longer had control. The space around us began to distort even more, the walls of the cabin seemed to close in, the air became heavy, almost impossible to breathe. And in the end, what scared me most was not the feeling of being trapped in that nightmare, but the fact that, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move anymore. I was completely paralyzed. Panic was taking over me. I knew something was wrong, something terrible, but I couldn't understand what was happening. The old man was there, motionless, but with that disturbing smile on his face, as if he was watching my struggle, my futile attempt to escape. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down, trying to find a way out of this situation. But when I opened my eyes, I realized that the cabin was no longer in the same place. There was no more asphalt or roads. What I saw through the window was a deep, endless darkness, as if we were floating in the void. The truck was stopped now, and the old man turned to me for the first time since we got there, his eyes fixed, as always. He didn't say anything else, but I could feel he was waiting, waiting for me to accept what was happening. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart beating. What I was seeing didn't make sense, the road didn't make sense, and neither did the old man. I was trapped, completely immersed in a reality that didn't fit, and all I felt was a feeling of being watched, of being part of a cruel game that I couldn't escape. Then, as if it were the end, the truck's cab disappeared. The sound of the engine dissipated, and the old man disappeared. I woke up on the side of the road, lying in the seat of the truck, with the dashboard lights still on. There was no fog, no distortion, nothing. Just the road in front of me, empty, silent, as if nothing had happened. I looked in the rearview mirror, and the reflection was there. But for some reason, the fear never left me. It was as if something had been erased from me, something I would never be able to understand again. When I arrived at the destination, nothing seemed real. The logbook was there, intact, and the road still looked the same. But that old man's look, those staring eyes, continue to haunt me to this day. I know it wasn't a dream. I know something was there with me, something that doesn't belong in this world. And, to this day, when I continue my journey, I feel as if he was waiting for me, there, at the next bend, watching. I know I won't escape. I was doing one of my longer routes, crossing the Oklahoma countryside, when I decided to stop at a rest station to get some rest. It was late, and the road was completely empty. The gas station felt isolated, the kind of place no one really chooses to stop at, but I didn't have many options. I was tired, I needed to stretch my legs, so I parked the truck. The place seemed too quiet, as if it were a dead spot on the road, a forgotten place. The gas station's lights flashed intermittently, but other than that, all you could hear was the wind hitting the trees and the sound of the truck's engine still turning off. I went out to stretch my arms and look around. There was nothing but an empty field, surrounded by a rusty wire fence and a few trees in the background. A kind of deep silence took place, but it was not the common silence, the one that calms. It was a dense silence, as if something was waiting. I took a closer look around, but tiredness soon took over and, after stopping for a long time, I ended up getting back into the truck. I closed the window curtains, took one last look at the dashboard, and tried to rest. But something wasn't right. I didn't know what it was, but the air was thick. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay there, staring at the roof of the truck, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was watching me. The darkness outside seemed thicker than usual. Suddenly, a noise broke the silence, a strange sound coming from outside. I first thought it was the wind, some branch moving, but no. It was a dull thump, as if something was hitting the truck. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to identify where that sound was coming from. I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to hear again. It didn't seem to be something natural, it wasn't just the wind. There were knocks, clear and repeated, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I got up, looked out the window, but didn't see anything. Just darkness, the empty field and the trees moving slowly in the wind. The sound seemed to have stopped, but then another knock echoed. Now stronger, closer. I didn't know what to do. I was alone there, in the middle of nowhere, at a rest station that seemed more like a forgotten place, as if I were being rejected by the world. I went to the truck door and opened the window a little, just to hear better. The sound came from outside, but it was no longer just a knock. Now, I could hear whispers. Low and indistinct, as if someone was speaking a language that I didn't understand, but that, somehow, chilled me inside. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, as if they were coming from within the field itself. I tried to ignore it, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks because of tiredness, but then the knocking came back. They were stronger now, more insistent. It wasn't the sound of branches, nor of animals. It was something different, something that seemed human. I sat back in the chair, tense, not knowing what to do. The fear was growing, but I didn't want to be a coward. It must be someone trying to scare, I thought. But as much as I tried to convince myself of this, something inside me knew it wasn't true. The whisper was clearer now. I could understand a few words, but what I was saying didn't make sense. It wasn't English, or any language I knew. It sounded like a guttural, almost ritualistic sound, something ancient. The banging on the side of the truck got louder, and I could feel the impact in the vehicle's vibrations. I didn't know if it was real or if I was starting to freak out, but the feeling of being watched, of being in the wrong place, wouldn't leave me. The air was getting thicker, and the temperature in the truck seemed to drop. I looked at the thermometer, and it was reading a lower temperature than normal, as if it were the middle of winter, but it was still summer outside. I took a deep breath and decided to get out of the truck to investigate. The feeling that something was wrong consumed me, but the fear of not knowing what awaited me outside was even greater. I opened the door slowly, trying to be as silent as possible, and put my feet on the floor. The field was quiet, there was no more wind, nor any noise. I was in the middle of absolute silence, but I still felt the whispers, now more distant, but still there. The station seemed completely deserted, but in the background, where the chain-link fence was, I saw something that made me freeze. A figure, short and hunched over, stood there, looking directly at me. I couldn't see details, but the shape was clear enough that I knew it wasn't an animal. He was human. Dread took over me, but what made me step back, without even thinking, was when the figure started to move. She didn't walk, but crawled, slowly approaching where I was. I quickly got into the truck, locking the door, my hands shaking. Fear was now consuming my mind. The figure didn't stop, it continued to crawl towards my vehicle. I looked out the window, but all I saw was darkness. The whispers were now at a deafening volume, and the banging on the truck began again, louder, faster, as if it wanted to invade the space where I was. I didn't know what to do. The figure was crawling faster now, and the whispers seemed to have turned into screams. The banging sound became frantic, as if something was trying to break the truck apart. Panic took over me, and no matter how hard I tried to start the engine, the keys wouldn't respond. The cabin was freezing, the air thick and heavy. I felt trapped, as if the station, the field, even the truck itself were being taken over by a force I couldn't understand. I looked out the window again and saw the figure now standing right next to the truck. There was no more movement, but the emptiness around her felt oppressive. Suddenly, the screams stopped. The silence, which was once oppressive, now felt empty, as if time had stopped there. I remained motionless, not knowing if I was still dreaming or if this was real. But the feeling that something was wrong, that I was no longer in control, left me completely paralyzed. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I shouldn't be there. Not at that post. Not in that land. Not in that forgotten place. I closed my eyes, trying to shake the vision away, trying to erase the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting. When I finally opened my eyes again, the field was empty. The figure disappeared, the sounds were gone, and the station seemed to be as silent as before. I didn't understand, but I knew something was deeply wrong with this place. I couldn't sleep anymore that night. When morning came, I was ready to leave without looking back. The truck finally started, and I sped up, leaving the gas station as if I was running away from something I couldn't control. As I drove away, the gas station disappeared in my rearview mirror, but a strange feeling still haunted me. I tried to tell someone what happened, but no one believed me. There were no records of an Indian cemetery there. The station looked like just another common rest station. And to this day, I don't know what really happened that night. But the feeling that that place wasn't just a rest stop still haunts me. Sometimes when I'm driving down those roads, I feel like I'm being watched again. As if the past, buried under the asphalt, was still waiting. And I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened at that station. I just know I don't want to go back there. It was one of those long, silent nights, the ones where you start to question whether time really exists. I was driving down the country road, far from civilization, on an unfrequented route. I-55 was empty, just me and the vast expanse of endless fields around me. The constant sound of the truck's engine was the only thing that broke the silence. I was tired, my eyes felt heavy, but I knew the next stop was far away. The truck's headlights illuminated the road in front of me, while darkness swallowed everything around. That's when I saw her. A woman, barefoot, in the middle of the road. I slowed down, looking at her, trying to understand if she was really there. She wore a white dress, which looked dirty, and her hair was disheveled, as if she had been dragged along the road. She was standing still, with her arms outstretched, waving as if asking for help. At that moment, my truck driver instinct kicked in and I stopped the truck. It was strange, no one in their right mind would stop in a place like that, but the feeling of need, of a genuine cry for help, made me act without thinking. When I got out of the truck and approached, the woman didn't say anything. She looked at me with wide eyes, as if she knew something was wrong. I asked if she was okay, but she didn't respond. He just handed me a note, with a handwritten phone number. Her gaze never left me, it was an empty look, but at the same time full of something deep, something I couldn't identify. I was about to ask more, but before I could open my mouth, she just disappeared. It wasn't a hurried walk, it wasn't a sudden movement. She simply disappeared. As if it had never been there. The road in front of me remained empty, and the surrounding countryside seemed unchanged. I looked around, trying to understand, but there was no sign of her. Nothing. I stood there for a few seconds, the note still in my hands, and a strange feeling invaded me. But, like a good truck driver, I tried to shake off that shiver and moved on. But something made me look at the note once again. I was curious, although I knew the best thing to do was ignore all that and continue my journey. Still, I pulled out the phone and dialed the number. The line chirped for a moment, and then a soft voice, but filled with cold tension, replied, "You should have helped me." The words came out in a slurred manner, as if the person on the other end was further away than the simple connection allowed. Silence took over me. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. The voice on the line continued, "Now, you can't go back." I stood there, holding the phone, unable to process what I had just heard. The line was silent for what seemed like an interminable amount of time, as if the person on the other end was waiting for something, waiting for me to say something. But I didn't know what to say. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice was shaky but I couldn't control it. There was no answer, just the static sound of the line, as if the person was silently watching me. That feeling of discomfort wouldn't go away. I wanted to throw the phone back on the bench and move on, but something was holding me there. The voice wouldn't leave my head. "Now, you can't go back." The words echoed in my mind, like a warning that could not be ignored. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to shake off the oppressive feeling, but when I opened them, I saw something that made my stomach turn. In the distance, on the road, I saw something moving. It wasn't the woman, but something else. A shadow, perhaps. I couldn't say, but it was there, standing in the middle of the road. What made me even more uneasy was that the shadow seemed to move every time I blinked, slowly approaching, as if watching me, as if it was waiting for me to approach. My heart raced. The feeling of being watched, of no longer being alone, intensified. I didn't know what was happening, but it no longer seemed like a simple coincidence. Something was wrong. I couldn't stay there any longer. Fear took over me. I looked at the note once again, that writing that seemed to have come from another time, another place. I wanted to get out of there, I wanted to get off that road, but the fear of not knowing what would come next paralyzed me. I took the key and started the truck, but before I started, I heard the voice again, now closer, as if it were whispering in my ear, but the line was disconnected. "You will regret not helping me." It was as if the words were coming out of the truck. The air grew thicker, and the feeling that something was about to happen swallowed me up. I could no longer see the shadow, but I felt its presence. Something was there, waiting. I turned the key and accelerated, trying to leave that place behind. The road in front of me seemed endless, but no matter how hard I tried to speed up, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being followed. I sped up even more. The road before me seemed endless, but the fear in my chest didn't lessen. The line in the rear-view mirror was blurred, and even with the truck's headlights illuminating the path ahead, the feeling of being followed did not disappear. I looked in the mirror and for a second I saw her. The woman. She was there, standing on the road, once again barefoot and wearing the same white dress, just watching, without making any movement. I blinked, and she was gone. But the dread remained, a feeling that something very wrong was happening and I was completely trapped in it. No matter how much I sped, the road remained empty, but I knew I was no longer alone. The woman's voice echoed in my head, like a distant but clear echo, "You should have helped me." I tried to turn it off, tried to convince myself that it was just a hallucination, but the pressure inside the truck, the heavy air, the presence I felt around me, made me feel like I was being watched. I looked at the dashboard and saw that the mileage wasn't adding up. The clock was stopped, which meant time had simply disappeared. That's when the headlight illuminated something in the middle of the road. A hole. A big hole in the asphalt, which wasn't there before. I tried to swerve, but the truck pulled to the side and before I could control it, everything around me went dark. The truck stopped suddenly. The cabin was freezing, and I knew something had happened, but I didn't know what. I looked around, and for the first time, the rest station I had seen before was there, in front of me. But it wasn't the rest station I remembered. It was different. And, from inside it, a telephone rang incessantly. The same ticket number. I couldn't move. The sound of the telephone ringing seemed to be coming from inside my own brain, and when I finally put my hand on the key to leave, the voice on the line rang one last time, now louder, more desperate, "Now, you can never leave." The rest was a whirlwind of flashes. I don't know what happened afterwards. The road in front of me disappeared. Time broke. And I never saw the woman or the station again. But something tells me it's still there, waiting for someone to make the wrong choice. And I will never forget the voice, saying those words, like a warning that should never have been ignored. I was driving along the remote highway, that part of I-70 that cuts through the Colorado countryside. The sky was cloudy, and the road in front of me seemed endless. I was used to long, lonely trips, but that night was different. Something was wrong, I could feel it in the air. The wind was colder than normal, and the sound of the truck's engine seemed muffled, as if it were the only sound that still existed. I was on those narrow and lonely roads, where any deviation could mean the end. And that's when I realized something was following me. At first, I thought it was another truck, someone else traveling the same route. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I didn't see anything else. Just the empty road and the shadows that stretched along the side of the road. I continued driving, but the discomfort accompanied me. A few miles later, when I looked again, I saw it. An old truck with worn paint was right behind me. I didn't know where it had come from, but there it was, following me at a constant speed, as if it were watching me. It wasn't a modern truck, much less a model I recognized. Its headlights seemed dim, and the cabin, even from a distance, looked dilapidated, as if it had been there for decades. The strangest thing was that, every time I looked in the rearview mirror, the truck seemed to be closer, but when I looked out the window or side mirror, it was no longer there. It appeared and disappeared erratically, like an illusion. But it wasn't an illusion, I knew something was happening. I felt that weight in my chest, a growing pressure, as if the truck was getting closer to me every second. That strange chase lasted for more than half an hour. The truck would appear, disappear, and then appear again. I tried to speed up, change lanes, but he kept following me. There were no other cars on the road, which made everything even more surreal. Just that truck, with its weak headlight, following me, like a shadow. When I finally decided to stop, the truck disappeared almost instantly. There was no sign of him anymore, not even his tire tracks on the road. But what completely chilled me was what appeared in its place. A large tire mark, deeply etched into the asphalt. The mark wasn't new, but it seemed much older, as if it had been left there for years, but was somehow present there, now. I got out of the truck, my body was tense, but what made me swallow hard was the path the tire track followed. It led to a cliff, which opened up just around a bend. There was no way to ignore it, the path seemed like a trap, as if the truck had come straight from that direction. The feeling that something wasn't right, something that was beyond natural, came over me. I looked at the road, the cliff in front of me, and I felt like I was drawn there, like I was being called. I stood there, standing in the middle of the road, looking at that tire track that seemed to call me. The feeling that I was being watched wouldn't go away, and a part of me wanted to just get in the truck and leave, but I couldn't. The air was thick, heavy, and the cliff in front of me seemed to threaten to swallow everything. I took a few steps toward the end of the road, where the tire track stretched to the edge of the lane, and as I got closer, a chill ran down my spine. The marks on the asphalt looked fresh, but there was no one in sight. I looked around, and the road was empty except for me. Then something peculiar happened. I heard the sound of gear behind me. I walked over to the truck, looked in the rearview mirror, and for a moment I thought the old truck was back. But no. There was no one. The rearview mirror was clear, the road was empty. I was in a remote location with no sign of other cars or any other human soul. But the sound persisted. The sound of an engine, soft but unmistakable. The feeling of being followed came back with a vengeance, as if the truck was still there, just waiting for the right moment to appear again. I was starting to doubt my own sanity. I got into the truck, locking the doors in a hurry. But before starting, something made me look outside once again. The field to my left seemed darker, deeper. Something about the landscape seemed distorted, as if time had stopped there. I tried to start the engine, but the truck didn't respond. The key was turning, but the engine didn't make even the slightest noise. It was then that I saw it. There, at the end of the road, a faint light appeared, once again. The truck. It was back. Or maybe he never left. I didn't know what to believe anymore. That light approached slowly, without rushing, as if it were a calm but extremely threatening presence. Closer and closer, until the image of the truck began to form in front of me. He was the same as before, but now, he seemed older, more corroded. It didn't look like a truck that could be there, on that road, at that moment. It didn't reflect in the windows, there were no sounds of tires, and the lights, although on, seemed to be off, as if the truck was just a shadow, a reminder of what it once was. I tried to turn the key again, more desperately now, and, by a miracle, the engine roared. The truck finally started, but the other truck's light disappeared as soon as I accelerated. When I came around the bend and looked in the rearview mirror, what I saw made me almost lose control. There was no longer any sign of the truck, but the road was different. The tire track was there, still present, but now, it led directly to the cliff. And then, one last vision froze me. The truck was standing, motionless, on the edge of the abyss, as if it had been dragged there by an invisible force, about to fall. I accelerated without thinking, without looking back, until the road began to open up, the landscape began to change. And yet, the fear did not leave me. The ghost truck, or whatever it was still with me, following me somehow. I knew he hadn't left. The road was empty, but the feeling that something was still watching me persisted. No matter where I went, I knew that somewhere on that desolate road the truck was still waiting for me. I didn't know where I was going, but something inside me told me it didn't matter. I was running away, running from something I couldn't see but felt every second. The road in front of me seemed endless, but the feeling of being followed wouldn't go away. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, it was as if the truck was there, in the darkness, just waiting. I forced myself to keep driving, trying to shake off the thought that something was approaching me, but fear consumed me. I felt like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. With each passing kilometer, the feeling of being trapped increased. The wind was stronger, and the silence was oppressive. Even the sound of the truck's engine seemed muffled, as if something was trying to swallow the sound, the space around it. I stopped for a moment, almost unable to continue, but the fear of being caught, of being reached by that thing, forced me to move forward. That was when the road, which had previously seemed deserted, began to change. It was no longer a straight road. The curves began to lengthen, and I could no longer distinguish where I was. It was then that, in front of me, a sign appeared, something I hadn't noticed before. The sign was crooked, rusty, and the paint was mostly faded, but I could read what it said: "Point of no return." My stomach turned. It was as if I had crossed an invisible line, something I shouldn't have crossed. I didn't know what else to do. The path was closing around me, and the feeling of being guided toward something, of being led to some destination, did not leave me. The truck was still there, in the rearview mirror, like a shadow. I accelerated once more, trying to escape the unbearable feeling, but I soon realized I was no longer in control. The road in front of me seemed to stretch into nothingness, as if it was taking me to an endless destination. And then, the light from the truck behind me began to shine more brightly. It was as if it were a presence, something that was already part of the road, that the road could not exist without. I no longer knew where I was or how long I had been driving. The feeling of being drawn to a place of no return, of being lost between time and space, consumed me completely. And then, in the darkest moment, the road disappeared. The truck, the shadow, everything disappeared. What was left was an empty, endless field, where the asphalt had crumbled, and the truck it wasn't there anymore. I stopped the vehicle, completely lost, but something told me that this was not the end. The feeling of being followed was still with me, a constant presence that never left me. The ghost truck, that truck that appeared and disappeared, was now part of the road. Part of what I had crossed. I never saw that road again. I never saw that truck again. But on every trip, every kilometer I travel, the feeling of being followed, of being on a path that I can no longer change, still accompanies me. Something was there, on that cliff, and I know that, somehow, it is still waiting for me.